Hey, Freddy with CJ Pony Parts. This 2014 EcoBoost F-150 behind me already has a fair modifications done to it. It's got a cold air kit, nice wheels and tires, and a full intercooler kit. But one area that's still lacking is the suspension. Today we're going to improve the handling and stability of this F-150 by installing this Eibach Pro Truck Sport Shock Kit. This Eibach kit includes two front adjustable struts that can lift the front of the truck up to 2 inches and rear shocks, and they each have a monotube design with 46mm pistons. These are direct fit replacement shocks and work nicely on trucks with a slight lift and bigger wheels and tires to improve handling and stability on and off the road. And today we're going to be installing them on this 2014 F-150 to make it even better and more fun to drive. Tools you'll need for this installation: a lift and a pole jack or a jack and jack stands, 1/4 inch ratchet, 8mm socket, a 15mm socket, 1/2 inch ratchet or breaker bar, a heavy duty electric impact or an air gun, 17mm socket, 18mm socket, 19mm socket, 21mm socket, 18mm wrench, 19mm wrench, 5/16 wrench or a pair of vice grips, a hammer, a big pry bar, and a heavy-duty spring compressor. The first step of this process is obviously to get the truck up in the air and take the wheel off. Now we have to take the strut off. To do that, we're going to start off by taking off the brake line on this side. We're going to be taking off an 8mm bolt here, and then there's one 10 here and another 10 back here. I like to put the bolts back in place just so I don't lose them. Remove the 21mm nut on the tie rod. Thread the nut on the stud to protect the threads, and you can give it a couple love taps and pop it out. Remove the 18mm nut on the bottom of the sway bar end link. Then the two 18mm nuts on the bottom of the strut. And remove the 21mm nut holding the steering knuckle to the ball joint. Alright, then once you get it off, put it back on a couple threads. Then you're going to hit right here with a hammer to release it. Remove the nut and carefully let down the knuckle. I'm going to loosen up these control arm bolts just to give us a little bit more room so the control arm can come down a little bit more, making it easier to remove the strut. Don't have to remove them, just loosen them. Do the other side as well. We're now in the final steps of removing the strut. We can remove the top 3 nuts up top, but before you do that, take a pry bar and put it underneath the strut right here before you loosen the nuts. I promise this will make it a lot easier when you remove it so it doesn't fall down and it gets stuck. Now I promise there is a third one, but it's way back here and you kind of can't see it. Now take your pry bar and push down on the lower control arm to pop the studs from the strut out of it. Now we have to take the spring off the old strut so we can put on the new Eibach strut. In order to do that, we need to compress the spring, and you will need a heavy-duty spring compressor for this. This is a very stiff spring. I wouldn't recommend using a cheap spring compressor on this. The Eibach strut does not have this spring holder on the bottom here, so we need to remove this from the original strut. These are only slightly pressed on, so you only need to hit them a little bit with a hammer to remove them. Now we need to hammer off this piece as well. The struts can only go in the truck one way, so what we're going to do, we're going to take this top off so we can lubricate it and we can clock it into place when we get it back in the truck. Now that we lubricated it, when the spring is in there, we can turn the top so we can line it up properly. So here are the adjustment points on the Eibach strut. We have it right here set at a 2-inch leveling. If you move it down to here, this is the stock ride height. So this is going to give our truck a 2-inch level up front. Take the ring and put it on. And then take the spring retainer from the old strut and put that on as well. Reuse the factory bump stop. And reinstall the top. Take the nut that Eibach supplies and put it on top of the strut. Now when you try to turn this nut with a socket, you're going to turn the whole shock. So what you need to do, you need to hold the shaft right here with a pair of vice grips and then turn the nut with a wrench. Now once the nut starts to get a little tight, when you turn it, the whole shaft is going to move. So what you need to do, you need to hold the shaft with a wrench. We're going to hold the shaft with a 5/16 wrench and turn the nut with a 19mm. That should be good. Now we can loosen the clamp and release the tension on the spring. Install the new Eibach strut. Slide the studs up into the mount and push it into place. So I have the top studs in place, but as you can see, the bottom still isn't lined up. The mount on the bottom of the strut isn't actually perpendicular with this strut. It has a slight angle to it. You want it to be facing this way. Once you have it lined up, push it into place. Install the supplied bolts. Put a washer and nut on the bottom. Install the 3 nuts up top. And tighten them down. You can now reinstall the tie rod. We're now going to jack up the lower control arm so we can reconnect the steering knuckle to the upper ball joint. and tighten up the ball joint. Tighten up the 19mm nut and bolt on the strut. Now we're going to tighten up the sway bar end link. Tighten up the tie rod. Tighten up the lower control arms. Reinstall your brake lines. Now repeat the process on the other side and we can move on to the rear. Now we can move on to removing the rear shock. These are super easy. All you'll need is an 18mm wrench and a 15mm wrench, or sockets. And now the bottom bolt. Now install the Eibach shock. Reinstall the original hardware. With the top bolt loosely installed, we can install the bottom now. And as you can see, it's just a little bit too long to fit in, so you need to compress it. Now install the nut. Now you can tighten it all up. Now repeat the process on the other side and your installation's finished. The Eibach shock kit is installed. It lifted the truck about 2 inches, making it nice and level with the rear, giving it a really nice look, and it's a lot stiffer. It makes the truck handle a lot better. Installation should take you about 4 to 5 hours, and before you know it, you'll be heading down the road.